The wind sliced through the narrow street like invisible blades, carrying with it the scent of rain and cold metal. The evening sky hung heavy, gray and low, as if it might collapse on the city at any moment. At a dimly lit bus stop, a man sat hunched on the bench, rubbing his hands together for warmth. His name was Ethan Cole, and this was his third week of searching for a job that didn't seem to exist. He'd been laid off from his construction company when the project funding vanished overnight. His savings were gone faster than he expected: rent, groceries, and the small medical bills from his mother's recurring illness. He wasn't homeless, not yet, but he'd started counting coins for bus fare and eating ramen for breakfast and dinner. The bus was late. It always was. Across the street, the city lights flickered on, bright signs for cafes, tech firms, and boutiques. Ethan used to work near those places, building walls and beams for offices filled with people who never noticed the laborers outside. He pulled his jacket tighter, an old brown one with frayed cuffs and a tear near the shoulder. That's when he noticed her. A woman stood at the far end of the bus shelter, clutching her arms tightly across her chest. Her thin coat was hardly enough for the biting wind. Her hair, dark and sleek, clung to her cheeks, and her high heels looked like the worst choice for weather like this. She wasn't the type Ethan usually saw waiting for the number 14 bus. Everything about her, her poise, her quiet confidence even in discomfort, screamed that she didn't belong here. Maybe her car broke down. Maybe she was lost. Still, she was shivering. Badly. Ethan hesitated. He didn't have much, but he did have something she needed. He stood up, unzipped his jacket, and walked over. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you look like you could use this more than me." She looked up, startled. Up close, she was beautiful in an understated way, but her eyes held exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come from just a long day, but from long years. "Oh, no, thank you," she said quickly. "I'm fine." "You're shaking," Ethan replied, offering the jacket anyway. "And it's not fine weather." Her lips parted slightly, as if to protest again, but the gust of wind that followed made her flinch. She took the jacket with a small nod, wrapping it around herself. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice softer now. "Don't mention it," he said, stepping back to lean against the pole. "Bus'll be here soon, I hope." They stood in silence for a moment. "You don't have another jacket?" she asked, glancing at his thin sweater. Ethan smiled faintly. "Nah, but I move around a lot. Keeps me warm enough." She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing the truth of that statement. "You're very kind. Just decent," he said. "You looked cold." Something like surprise flickered in her eyes. Maybe she wasn't used to people doing things for her without expecting something in return. The bus arrived 15 minutes later. When she reached into her purse, Ethan noticed her hands trembling, not from the cold, but from fatigue. He paid no mind to it. He stepped aside, letting her board first. She turned slightly at the door. "I'll return your jacket somehow," she said. Ethan shook his head. "Don't worry about it," but she was already gone, sitting near the back of the bus. He didn't follow. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because he'd learned long ago not to expect anything back when you gave something away. He sat 2 rows ahead, watching the city blur by. When the bus stopped near 8th and Main, she rose to leave. For a second, she looked at him again, almost as if she wanted to say something, but then the doors opened, and she was gone. Ethan was sitting in a dingy cafe, circling job listings in a newspaper that was 2 days old. The waitress knew him well enough now to just pour coffee without asking, though she always looked at him with quiet pity. "Still looking, huh?" she said. "Still breathing," Ethan replied with a tired grin. The bell above the cafe door jingled. A woman stepped in, well-dressed, confident, and familiar. Ethan looked up and blinked. It was her, the woman from the bus stop. But tonight, she wasn't cold, and she wasn't shivering. She was radiant, wearing a tailored navy coat and heels that didn't belong on wet pavement. "Ethan Cole?" she asked. He froze. "Yeah, that's me," she smiled. "I've been looking for you." She pulled out a small envelope from her purse and handed it to him. "For starters, your jacket." He chuckled awkwardly. "You didn't have to. Please, open it." Inside was not his jacket, but a check. A real one, for $5,000. Ethan stared at it, confused. This can't be right. "I'm not sure you remember me clearly," she said gently, taking a seat across from him. "My name's Victoria Hale. I'm the CEO of Hale Urban Development." Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. Hale Urban was one of the largest construction firms in the state. He'd heard of them. Hell, he'd helped build one of their office towers 2 years ago. I was coming home from a meeting that night, she continued. My driver had an emergency, and I decided to take the bus. I'd been having one of the worst days of my life. A board member tried to undercut me, an investor pulled out, and I thought I'd lost everything I'd worked for. Then, you handed me your jacket. No hesitation, no expectation. Ethan tried to speak but couldn't. That moment stuck with me, she said. I realized how disconnected I'd become from the people who actually keep this city running. You reminded me what kindness looks like. The next morning, I told my HR department to reopen our apprenticeship program, the one we shut down when we cut costs. She slid another envelope toward him. This one wasn't a check, it was a letter. Employment offer. Hale Urban Development. Position. Site Supervisor Trainee. Start date. Monday. Ethan stared at it, stunned silent. You're offering me a job. You earned it, Victoria said. And not just because of that night. I looked into your work record. Your former supervisor had high praise, said you were the kind of man who never left a site until the job was done. He blinked rapidly, emotion thick in his throat. I don't know what to say. Say you'll show up Monday, she said with a smile. And maybe buy yourself a better jacket. He laughed then, a real, full laugh that seemed to warm the room. Winter came again. This time, Ethan wasn't sitting at a bus stop in the cold. He was standing on a high-rise balcony, wearing a hard hat and watching cranes lift steel beams into the foggy sky. He was thriving. The job had changed everything. He had stability, confidence, and a small apartment he could finally call home. Victoria visited the site once every few weeks, checking on progress. But she always made time to talk, not as a boss to an employee, but as two people who shared a strange, meaningful memory. One afternoon, as snow began to fall, she joined him on the balcony. Looks like it'll be a good building, she said, gazing out over the city. Ethan smiled. I hope it keeps people warm. She turned to him, that same smile from the cafe crossing her face. You still think about warmth a lot, don't you? Guess it matters, he said. Some folks don't get much of it. They stood in silence for a while, watching the snow. You know, Victoria said softly, I kept your jacket. He glanced at her. I thought you said you'd return it. I tried, she said with a grin. But I realized it's more than just a jacket. It reminds me to stay human. Ethan laughed. Well, I'm glad it's serving a purpose. A gust of wind swept between them. For a second, he saw her shiver. Without thinking, he shrugged off his new, heavy company jacket and offered it to her again. She raised an eyebrow. You never learn, do you? Maybe not, he said with a smile. But some habits are worth keeping. She took it, slipping it over her shoulders, and for a brief, quiet moment. Amid the sound of hammers, wind, and snow, they stood together, both warmed by something far deeper than fabric.